Welcome everyone, this is Ryan and lesson 19 of learning HTML and CSS. In this lesson we'll be learning about CSS font sizes. So let's begin by taking a look at our browser. You'll notice I have a standard heading, I have a paragraph. In that paragraph I have some bold text, and the word text I've also made italic using an M tag. So if we look at the code, there's my heading, my paragraph, the bold text between strong tags, and the italics text between M tags. I'm linking to lesson 19.css, which is currently empty, and that's our basic HTML structure. So in terms of font sizes, a browser always has a default font size. Let's go have a look. In Chrome we can just search for font, go to customize fonts, and you'll see the standard font size for Chrome would be 16 pixels, and it's Times New Roman. And in fact most browsers, Firefox, Internet Explorer, will default to a size of 16, and Times New Roman is the family. So you can of course change that, and changing that will obviously affect the default size of the browser. Okay, so if we had to define a rule for a paragraph, we could say font size and then specify a unit of measurement. So we'd say 16 px4 pixels. You'll see no change because that is the default font size. However, if I specify 26 pixels for the paragraph, you'll see a much larger size for the paragraph. Let's talk about units of measurement, because there are a number of units of measurement that you can use. Firstly, if you are working with print media, you can have a separate CSS set of rules for print media. You would just say media equal to print as opposed to media equal to screen, which would be the default. So this set of rules would then only apply to actually printing out the web page to a printer. If we leave out the media, then it defaults to screen, which would be obviously how it would look on somebody's screen. So if you are doing rules for print, we would use one of the following units of measurement: centimeters, millimeters, inches, or point size. Okay, so if you're working with screen, which we are going to be working with, you would use either pixels, which is an absolute unit of measurement. Pixel would be a dot on the screen. Or you would use a relative unit of measurement, which could be ems, or alternatively a percentage. Most of the time we will just use ems. Okay, so you've seen now what a pixel is. I'll just give you one more example of a pixel. If we had to choose, let's say, 8 pixels, you'll see quite a small font size, not very easy to read. So typically you'd use, let's say, 12 or maybe larger. You can of course set a font size for your heading as well. Okay, you can see it's now much smaller than what it was previously. If we go for 30, closer to what the original font size was for a heading. Alright, so what is an M then, if we now know what a pixel is? Well, an M would be equivalent to whatever the parent font size is. So let's do an example. I'll show you an example with paragraph. If I had to say 1M, 1M would be equivalent to the parent font size. So what is the parent of a paragraph? In this case, the parent of the paragraph is the body. So what is the font size of the body? Well, we haven't actually defined it here in the CSS. So then the font size would default to whatever the default font size is here in the browser, which is 16 pixels. So 16 pixels would be the default font size for body. So that's 16 pixels for the paragraph. If I had to change the font size to something larger in the browser, let's say 20, you'll notice that the paragraph has also changed to 20. So it's relative, it's a relative unit of measurement. However, if I say 16 pixels, remember pixels is an absolute unit of measurement, that should override the default browser font setting. So even though the default browser font setting is 20 for the body, because I've set the paragraph font size to 16, it overrides that setting. Right, let's go back to the normal 16 as the default, and let's go back to using M's. If I now say 2M's, 2M's would be double what the parent font size is. So parent font size is 16 of the body, so the paragraph would then be 32. Let's do another example. I now have a strong tag within that paragraph tag. So the strong tag is a child of that paragraph. If I set the font size of that to 1M, it should be exactly the same as its parent, which is 2M's, and that is therefore 32 pixels. Because you see, strong is actually a child of paragraph, so nothing changes. But if I had to make the strong size 0.5 M's, it would be half of what its parent is. Its parent is 32, so therefore strong should be 16. Right, so you can see that is size 16. If I go one step further, you'll notice there's a M tag, which is in turn a child of the strong tag. And let's make that 3M's. What size will that be? It's pretty big. How do we calculate that size? Well, first of all, we know that the size of the body is 16 pixels. The size of the paragraph is double that, which is 32. The size of the strong is half that, which is 16. So therefore the size of the M would be 3 times 16. So 3 times 16 is 48. So the size of the M tag is 48 pixels. So the next question is, where do we use pixels and where do we use M's? Well, as you can see, it's much easier to use pixels because you know immediately what unit you're working with. So most of the time I actually use pixels. But when it comes to using standard fonts for cell phones, a cell phone screen is much smaller than a desktop screen. So for a cell phone, it would be preferential to use M's if you need to have something that's compatible with both a standard desktop browser and a cell phone. Because remember, an M would always be relative to its parent unit of measurement. So we know that a browser on a desktop has its font size set to 16 pixels as a default. But obviously the default font size on a cell phone screen would be much less than the 16 pixels on a desktop browser. So if you want to design a website that is what we call a responsive website, where we design it specifically to be compatible with both cell phones and desktops, then the ideal unit of measurement would be an M, because then it's always going to be relative to whatever the parent font size is set to. However, if you're only designing a site for desktop, it's going to be easier for you probably to use pixels as an absolute unit of measurement. But then if you are going to use pixels, remember, if you view that same site on a cell phone screen, it's not going to be appropriate. It's going to be far too big for the cell phone screen, or far too small, depending on whatever your font size was set to in pixels for the desktop. So I hope that helps you understand font sizes in CSS. That ends our lesson.